Okay, welcome to Theory 4 again. And I wish we could be doing this live like normal, but my schedule changed. And so I'm actually going to be, by the time you're watching this, Lord willing, I'll be way down in the southern part of the US. It should be a little warmer there, probably, Sana. And I am going to be there. Some of my family lives there, and also my church, my sending church is there. So I'm going to be spending a little bit of time there before coming back to Wisconsin in the north where my parents live, where I will be having more meetings at churches and trying to adjust to the cold weather if possible. So anyway, when I'm recording this, it's actually September 10, my time, September 11, your time, and hopefully you're getting ready to take your test. So by the time you watch this, that will be all over with, and you probably have your grade by then and everything. So, okay, before you took your test, you did some reading about cannons, okay, not the kind that you would use in the war, okay, the musical canon. And hopefully you're familiar somewhat with that concept. Probably you are, from other things that you have maybe studied. You're familiar with the around, and those are some other concepts, okay? So anyway, we've already covered a lot in Counterpoint, all of the 5 species to one degree or other, and there's always more to learn, more to practice with that, but we're going to put those behind us in a lot of ways. There'll be things that you learned in that portion of Counterpoint that will apply to your writing in the future, even things like arranging class, composition class. Some of those things will come back to haunt you, hopefully not haunt you, but hopefully what you've learned will help you think more about what kind of line you're writing, not just what harmonies vertically, but also horizontally, what kind of line that you have within this one part. Is it more melodic? Is it more just homophonic in nature? Okay, is it more of a harmony instead of an actual melody? Okay, so hopefully those things will still stick with you, even though we're kind of moving away from that type of thing. So you're going to be doing more with analysis, not quite so much with writing at this point. Okay, so let's jump in, and we are going to look at the canon. You should have a handout about this. You've again done the reading from Greason about it. Here we go, canon. Okay, a canon has at least 2 voices, surprise, surprise. Okay, when we're talking about Counterpoint, it needs to have at least 2 voices, okay? It's note against note. So that means that we have to have more than one note happening somehow simultaneously, vertically, okay? So a canon is going to fit in with what we've already talked about with Counterpoint, at least 2 voices. Okay, we have both the leader at saka yung follower, diba? So the leader, of course, is the one that goes first. Surprise, surprise. In Latin, this is called dux, okay? So the leader is the first thing we need to know. Then again, we have the follower. Okay, that is the voice that comes after the leader. Again, surprise, surprise. So if you have more than 2 voices, the first one is going to be the follower. The first one is going to be, let me say this, okay. The first one's always going to be the leader. But if you have more than 2 voices, so if you have 3 voices, for instance, okay, so the first one is going to be the leader. Tapos, yung second voice will be the first follower, okay? Then you have your third voice being the second follower, okay? So that should be relatively simple. The Latin term for follower is comes. One thing that might help you remember this is that comes, it looks like the word comes. If you think about comes after, I don't know if that helps you or not at all. The comes is the one that comes after the leader, okay? So the word canon actually is a Greek word. You can tell Pastor Abed that you learned Greek in theory class. Amazing, so cool. So it's a Greek word, it means rule, okay? The rule for this is that the follower must follow the leader. Wow, that's really complicated, isn't it? Joke lang. Okay, so the canon, it just means rule. Okay, so if you're thinking canon in D, you could say rule in D, but we wouldn't say it that way because that doesn't sound quite so cool. Okay, so the rule is that the follower must follow the leader. I think that's kind of how it's supposed to work anyway. If you're the follower, you're supposed to follow the leader. Okay, here's an example that's kind of cool. It's a little bit tricky to play because your hands are crossing like this, okay? But again, this wasn't written to be played on the piano so much as other instruments, okay? This is by Telemann. And just listen, okay? You can clearly see, it's only 2 voices, okay? 2 voices long. You can see clearly where the leader starts and where the follower starts after that. Okay, and I'll try to not get my hands mixed up too much. We will see. Sorry. So again, it's tricky to play because my hands are right on top of each other essentially. And sometimes it would be easier if one was this way, and then it would be easier sometimes if it was this way. Let me try one more time. Okay, something like that. It's still cool, even with some mistakes. It would be even cooler if it was on the instruments it was written for. Okay, but you can see we have a whole measure, which is actually 2 beats long. Whole measure of the leader starting, and then the follower comes in right after that. So not too long after that, the follower comes in. Notice where the follower starts compared to where the leader starts. Where does the follower start? What note does it start on? Okay, the leader starts on F. The follower starts on F and in the same octave that the leader started in. That's what makes it hard to play on the piano because there's so much overlap going on because they both start on the same note. And the leader doesn't get out of the way all that much. They both kind of stay right together, right on top of each other almost, which sounds cool. It's just tricky to play. Okay, we'll come back to some of those scenes in a little bit. So we can have a true canon. This is where the imitation continues for a longer part of the piece, okay? I'm going to actually assign you, after this class, I'll assign you a reading from Huysenstam, which is another online resource, another counterpoint textbook, some worksheets. We've done some of Huysenstam's worksheets. He has a chapter that talks about canons, but actually he starts off by talking about imitation, and the ideas go together. Okay, so I thought it would be helpful if you could also read some more about imitation. A canon is kind of like imitation on a larger scale, I guess we could say. So a prolonged imitation idea, essentially. So a true canon is when you have imitation that's continues for a longer part of the piece, okay? But it's not usually going to continue the entire piece. But there's going to be definite like copy paste type of ideas that we're seeing when we have a true canon, okay? Not just like copy a few notes here into this part here, but copy a longer section and paste it, but offset, okay? Canonic imitation, in contrast to true canon, is where we have imitation that's used still, okay? But it's only used until each voice has stated the initial material. So maybe we have like 4 measures, maybe 2 measures long. But the idea is that the imitation is only used for a short amount of time. So the leader is going to state this material, then the follower is going to state that, and then that's it. That's all the imitation that we get. At least that's more extended, okay? But it's not going to probably just be a few notes. Otherwise, we would just call that regular imitation, okay? So what are some terms that we need to know we're talking about a canon. First of all, we want to think, what is the harmonic interval? Harmonic interval. What does that mean? Well, the harmonic interval is the interval between the first note of the leader and the first note of the follower. So kanina, we saw that actually they both started on the same note. Okay, let's go back to our example. So here we have F. Okay, the leader starts on an F. Then you say, okay, where does the follower start? What note does it start on? F. Is it in the same octave, a different octave? What is it? Well, it's exactly the same octave. So our harmonic interval is what? It would be just a unison. Okay. And Kennan, who wrote a counterpoint textbook that I use in school, he says that unison is not as common because of the potential voice crossing. And you can see, or at least hear, my struggle with the voices crossing, okay? And again, that was because of the piano, pero it depends on what you're going for. Maybe we're trying to avoid that kind of voice crossing. If we want to have two lines that are slightly more separated, then you probably don't want to do unison, or we're just going to be kind of intertwining the two voices, maybe quite often, depending on how your leader is going to continue on. If it starts something and then gets really out of the way, and then the follower comes in, maybe you won't have so much voice crossing, but at some point it's going to be hard not to do voice crossing, okay? The harmonic interval of a second or a third is not as common either because of potential voice crossing, okay? So the unison, the second and the third will not be as common because of this issue with voice crossing. It's not that they're bawal, it's just not as common. But you will see these kinds of harmonic intervals used often. The fourth, the fifth, and the sixth, okay? So fourth, fifth, sixth used often, but not the seventh as often. And you could probably figure out that if you think about starting the second voice at the interval of a seventh, that doesn't mean that where it comes in, your leader and follower are right at a seventh. But you can probably tell that if you're going to have this relationship of here's your leader and then your follower is coming in later sometime at the interval seventh, maybe that's going to be trickier to make it actually work out, okay? So fourth, fifth, and sixth are going to be used often. Let me just say something about the fourth and the fifth also. Okay, so if you're let's say your leader is starting sababa, okay, then your follower is going to start satas. Let's say your leader starts on do, and then your follower starts a fifth above. What is your follower going to be on? It's going to start on sol, okay? Pero if it's baliktad, where you have your leader sa taas, your follower sa baba, okay? We could use, let's say our leader starts on do, and our follower starts on a fourth below that. Well, what is a fourth below do? It's the same as the fifth above, diba? Okay? So then we end up with having do and sol, even though this is the fourth below. It's harmonic interval of the fourth, okay? So you can see why those two might be pretty common because of the important scale degrees as well, okay? Depending on how your notes are working out with both parts, the sixth, that creates a nice interval. But again, probably we're not necessarily using do by the time that voice comes in. Maybe, maybe not, just depending. Okay, octave is actually used most often. So you could see where that might be a little bit easier to work out as far as the harmonies and things like that. Okay, we don't have to maybe adjust intervals so much. Probably in most cases, we can just basically copy paste, but just put it an octave apart. So if we would have actually put the telemon an octave apart, it would have been a lot easier to play. It would have had the same, in a way, kind of the voice overlap was kind of nice as far as the actual sound, just not as easy to play. But we could have just put it an octave apart instead of right here at the unison, and that would have probably worked better to actually play it. okay? You could actually use a ninth and a tenth as substitutes for a second and third. So again, the second and the ninth would be the same thing, but just adding an extra octave in between. So if our main problem, let's say we're writing it for piano and we don't want to have this voice crossing going on, then let's say here at the second, they're going to be so close, just bump it down an octave or bump this up an octave, something like that, okay? And that's going to make it work a lot better. Or a tenth in place of a third, that'll work too. An 11th isn't as common, but a 12th is used more often. You don't necessarily have to remember all these super specific things, but try to learn like which ones are going to be more common, most common for sure. Okay, so we have the harmonic interval. So the distance, the interval of those two notes, the start of the leader and the start of the follower. Then we have another interval. This is called the time interval. Now, we might be tempted to think this has to do with like an interval like a fifth or something like that. Pero the time interval is going to be different. It doesn't have to do with fourth or fifth, something like that, okay? That's the harmonic interval. And we would kind of expect that from something called the harmonic interval, okay? So the time interval naman, it stands for the amount of beats or the amount of measures between the start of the leader and start of the follower. In our example, kanina, okay, we said our harmonic interval was perfect unison, diba? Pero our time interval, what was our time interval naman? Okay, 2 beats long, 1 measure. Okay, that's not very much time, just a little bit, but not very much. We probably wouldn't typically have much less than 2 beats, pero we might have more than 2 beats. Okay. This is going to vary, of course, from piece to piece, just as the harmonic interval is varying from piece to piece. And it might, again, depend on how your harmonies are working out, okay? And how your leader, where it's going, and then how that works with what you're trying to do with the follower, okay? So you can maybe try different things. There might be different options, but maybe there's some things that work better than others as well. Okay, if your leader is heard for just a tiny bit of time before the follower comes in a way it's almost harder to recognize what's going on, or to even realize that it's a canon maybe, okay? So the canon is more clearly recognizable if you've had a long enough time to hear the leader, muna, okay? Especially if it's not a common melody. If we're doing this with a hymn that you already know, maybe it's going to be more obvious if you're doing a canon. But if this is the first time for people to hear this melody and you give them 2 beats long, in some cases that's going to feel like maybe they don't really get what's going on, okay? So you want it to be heard long enough before the follower enters so that people can recognize they have this melody in their head that they've just heard, but they've heard enough of it by itself that when the follower comes in, they can realize, oh, that's what was just happening in the other voice, okay? But you also have to be careful that you don't have your leader go on for a super long time before the follower enters. If your leader is just going on and on and on and on and on, you won't necessarily remember the beginning of the leader by the time the follower enters. And then you don't really get what's going on, okay? Here's one. This is a set of just short pieces by Schumann. I actually played them in college, and I don't know how to say it in French. It's like papillon, maybe. I think you don't pronounce it in S. Anyway, that part's not so important. Pero this one is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 measures, something like that, okay? But it's kind of like a very short canon. Okay, so I'm gonna play it for you and see if you can determine both what's the first kind of interval we talked about? The harmonic interval and then the time interval. Okay, so the amount of space between our leader and our follower, space as in distance between the two notes, okay? So the actual interval between the two notes. And then also how much time we have to hear the leader before the follower enters, okay? Here we go. Okay, and I didn't do my decrescendo rule, super good, but anyway, you get the point. So we have this idea happening. Okay, we have sol. Okay, so what, first of all, is our harmonic interval? Our first note, sa taas, in the leader, is C sharp, which is sol, because we're going to keep F sharp minor. Okay, and then our bass enters, and it's like an octave lower, diba? Okay, so we have an octave, which we said is actually quite common. So we have our harmonic interval is an octave. How about our time interval? Well, essentially it's 2 measures, diba? Okay, so like 6 beats. So that's a little bit more than our other one that we saw by Telemann. Okay. If you would look at these voices, it's really just copy paste and just at the octave, copy and pasting an octave lower. Okay, until we get to the end. Okay, once we get to a few measures from the end, we have this inner voice. That's basically just going in like tense with the follower. Makes it more interesting than just this. You could have done that, but we decided to add another voice for a little bit of extra interest. Okay, so that one's actually relatively simple, but it's nice. It's kind of cool. It seems like it works pretty well. It's nice to look at and listen to because it is so short. So just one example of a canon. Okay, here's another interesting one. It's from a Mozart sonata. And do you see the canon yet? Well, the canon doesn't come yet, okay? So this is not going to be like an entire piece or even the majority of the piece necessarily that's canon. We don't even start with the canon, okay? But it starts by introducing the main theme. And then later we're going to have, maybe we could call it more canonic imitation. So there's a very clear imitation that's going to be going on, but we don't see it at the beginning, which we would maybe expect that to be very clear from the beginning, more maybe if we were going to have a true canon. Okay, we just have this. I'll try to play it okay-ish. Okay, that's pretty cool. This is kind of recognizable. It sounds cool, but actually if you look at it, what is it doing? It's just outlining the D major triad, the 1 chord, diba? Pero he's gonna go kind of back and forth and play around with different chord tones to make it sound more melodic, and it sounds really cool. Okay, then he goes to some fancier stuff. That still sounds cool. Okay, then later we see something like this, and actually there should be a pickup note, an F natural pickup note somewhere over here or in the previous measure. This is jumping to a different part of the piece, but I'm just trying to show you the theme. Sa beginning, tapos yung canonic imitation mamaya in the piece, okay? So here we would have a pickup note F natural. Okay, so it's gonna sound like this. Okay, have you heard that before? Well, it's just our main theme, diba? Pero it's the right hand lang. Then what does the left hand do? Okay, so the left hand is going to have its turn as well. It has to wait its turn. So we have the right hand muna playing the theme in a different key, diba? Okay, pero it's very recognizable as a theme. And then we have the left hand coming in. Well, what is our harmonic interval? We would have an F natural muna that's missing on here just because of the pickup note and the way it was, okay? So it should be F natural. Tapos sa left hand, sa follower naman, we have F natural D, okay? So our harmonic interval is actually, is it unison or is it an octave? Well, it's spread out, diba? Okay, it would be at the octave, which is one of the most common ones, okay? So at the octave, and what is the time interval? Well, it's a full measure actually, okay? And in 6/8, okay, so we have like 2 beats. 2 full beats, but maybe they feel a little bit longer than a beat in 2/2 timing, 2/4 timing, okay? So let me play this for you and you can hear a little bit of what it sounds like. Something like that. I don't know how it goes on for sure. Okay, yeah, it would go something like that. Okay, so we have a measure in between, but we're going to have our octave, which we actually started off with an octave between the two, pero there wasn't any canon yet. Okay, this is jumping forward. Now this time, which hand is actually the leader? What do you think? It is the left hand naman. Okay, we have the left hand leading, tapos the right hand is becoming the follower. It's kind of like in choir, maybe. You know how the sopranos always think they should always get the melody, they should always be the leaders, okay? And then all of a sudden the altos or somebody else gets the melody and the sopranos don't understand why they don't have the melody and they can't read their part, something like that. It's kind of the same thing with the right hand and the left hand in piano sometimes. We feel like the right hand should always have the melody and then all of a sudden the left hand has the melody and it's really cool. And the left hand is happy, but maybe the left hand is struggling a bit with it too. Anyway, okay, this time it's actually going to be in minor. Hopefully you can tell what kind of minor key it looks like. It's in G minor, diba? Okay. And then the right hand, let's look at our harmonic interval. We have D and then D, an octave higher. So again, we have our harmonic interval of an octave. And then if we look at our, time interval, this is the same as the last one. The last one we had a whole measure for time interval between the start of the leader and the start of the follower. Pero dito, mayroon half measure lang. Okay, so let me play it for you and you can hear what's going on a little bit. Sorry. Something like that, okay? But you can see how it's just at the octave and it's coming in sooner than it did before. We actually scrunch it closer, but actually maybe we can get by, or Mozart can get by with having the follower come in sooner, so having a shorter time interval this time, because we've actually already heard, for one thing, we've heard the theme at the very beginning very clearly, so we already have heard that theme there. We've for sure heard it again here, and this time we had a whole measure to listen to just the theme and to recognize what's happening, a little bit about what's happening. Now this time, maybe we can recognize it easier because we're already more familiar with it. Okay, how about this one? Do we see it anywhere else? We're looking for that sol, do idea. Okay, well, we have it right here. But the question is, do we actually have any kind of imitation happening? Or is it only the theme just in one hand long? Well, we're looking for F sharp and B. What do we have in the left hand? F sharp and B. Okay, so what is our harmonic interval? Well, it's an octave, buddy. Okay, it's a little bit harder to recognize that this is the theme because in this case, we don't have the pickup note. The pickup note is partly what helps us recognize it as the theme, in my mind, okay? We've had a pickup note here that you can't see, sorry. We've had the pickup note here, and that kind of rhythm is what makes it maybe extra clear. That is the theme. Pickup note here, pickup note here. Okay, we've always had that. But this time, walang pickup note sa follower. Okay, but we still have the same pattern of notes going on. So we have a super duper short time interval. But again, we can get by with it better here than we can at the beginning, because here, hopefully by this time, we're really used to the fact that we're going to have this little imitation happening throughout. And we can tell sooner that we actually have the theme happening, even though maybe it's not quite so clear as it would be. Okay, see if you can hear what's going on. Okay, and then after 2 measures of doing that, we actually go into another measure where we're starting to have this idea happening again. So if you look at this measure right here, okay, we would say that the imitation, or actually the leader, is starting right here. Bum, bum. Okay, the B to E, and then it's starting right here. It's the left hand, and this time again we're at the octave. Okay, that's our harmonic interval, and our time interval is again only 1/8 note, which isn't really even a beat in 6/8. Okay, if we're thinking about it properly, as in 6/8, we really have 2 main beats in the measure. It's only like 1 subdivision of that beat that is our time interval. So it's super short again. Let me start again from the beginning of that line, and then hopefully you can catch what's coming in again. Sorry, let me try again. Okay, so on line 3, again. Okay, and we have a bunch of minor ones in a row. Okay, we've had B minor going to E minor, and then going to A minor, and we're actually essentially going, depends on how you look at it, maybe going down by 5ths or up by 4ths. Okay, the first one actually goes down by a 5th. And then the next one is going up by a 4th, if I'm thinking of this correctly. I think so. Okay. So here's the third line. Something like that. Sorry, it's kind of hard to read from this distance. I need to get glasses, I guess. Okay, and maybe there's more of the canonic imitation in that piece, maybe not. I'm not actually sure. But those are some of the main ones. And you can see it actually is happening quite a bit. And again, this is not like a straight canon. It's not a true canon. But we have a lot of canonic imitation going on. And it's pretty cool. It makes it an interesting piece. Lots of exciting things going on in it. Okay, so in your reading, you read about Bach's Goldberg variations and the importance of canons and the role that canons play within Bach's variations. Okay, each third variation is a canon at consecutive ascending intervals. Okay, so he's talking about harmonic interval here, right? So each third variation out of, I'm trying to remember how many there are. There's at least 27, maybe more. Each third variation is going to be a canon at consecutive ascending intervals. So let's look at and see how this is working actually. Okay, so variation 3 is the first one that's a canon. So we've already had 2 before this. Okay, variation 3, canon at the unison. Okay, so these are a little bit confusing because they're what we call accompanied canon. So we have more than two voices. If we have two voices lang, it's a little bit easier to actually see what's happening. Okay, so the left hand is actually not part of the canon. So here we go. Here is our opening line. And then there's another voice we can see that enters here. And they're kind of woven around each other, so it's a little bit tricky to see what's going on. But we're looking for something like this, whether it's actually starting on the B or not. If we're just trying to analyze it and we don't know any information about it yet, we wouldn't know specifically what starting note to look for. But once we see this kind of idea happening, then that will make it clear what our interval, harmonic interval actually is. Okay, so we see that idea happening here. And then we realize actually that's just the same on the same notes, exact same notes, not even octave harmonic interval, but it's the same notes. And so we realize that this B right here is actually part of the follower. The G here is the leader. Okay, and then that means this voice is going to have to be the leader. So it has, the leader makes an octave leap. Okay, and then this is still the follower. And this one is the follower. Okay, let me see if I can maybe highlight some of these scenes a little bit in different colors. Okay, so I'm going to make, whoops, I think I want that maybe. Actually, I don't know what I want. No, I just want this one. I just want something like this. Okay, so this is going to be, that's not what I'm wanting. Okay, I think I just clicked on the wrong thing at first. Let's see if this works better. Sana, why is this not wanting to work for me? Sorry. Okay. Okay, let me just close out of this and see if I can get back to it. And okay. I think it was pressing the, I didn't want to press it first. I think this will work. Yan. Okay, so I'm going to circle this because that's all part of our leader. This is our leader still. And all of this is going to be our leader. Okay, I'm just going to try to circle all that. Okay, and then we can see, let me switch colors to red. This is where our follower starts. Okay, and all of this is going to be our follower. Oops, sorry, hopefully it's still legible somewhat. Okay, so now we're trying to figure out what of this mess down here is going to be our leader and what is going to be our follower. Well, if we're trying to figure out what our follower is, we know that whatever the leader did here, the follower is going to do in this measure, okay? So the leader is doing this octave leap, okay? So we're actually looking for the octave leap and then this little trilly type thing, okay? So here we have a G. We're at the unison, we have an octave leap, and then we're going to have this idea here, which is kind of hidden in some other things, kind of woven into some of the other things there. Okay, and that will be our follower there. So that means that the rest of it, so right hand, is going to be our leader. Let me see if I can find what's going on. Okay. So essentially these ideas are going to be our leader, something like that. Okay, hopefully this isn't too confusing for you. I don't know. And then whatever our leader did here, we're expecting to see the follower do here. And then whatever's left is going to be our leader. So let me try to circle that So we're looking for whatever was blue here is going to be red here. Okay. And this kind of changes a little bit. Looks like it's slightly different. Maybe not quite the same. Okay. So essentially that's going to be our follower here. This little idea. Okay, that we can see here. And this kind of goes on and does a few other things here as well. Okay. So hopefully that kind of helps you to see that. Let's actually listen to it now for a little bit. I'm going to try to get this going. If my computer will cooperate with me. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of what it sounds like. We're going to go to the next one a bit here. Okay. There we go. Okay. So the next one is going to be variation 6, because it's every 3 variations we have a canon. So variation 3, we have a canon. Then variation 6, we're going to have a canon. Now, variation 3 is canon at the unison. That's our harmonic interval. So what are we looking for? What are we expecting that variation 6 will be? What is going to be our harmonic interval? Well, we learned, Kanina, that the way it works is every 3 variations there's a canon, and it's at ascending intervals. So that means the next one is going to be not a canon at the unison or 1, the first, but it's going to be a canon at the second. Okay, so then we might think, how does this even work? That sounds like it's kind of like lots of not nice intervals maybe, but it just depends on how it's constructed. What Bach does is actually quite brilliant because he's using the fact that we have this interval of a second. You know, it's possible that in the next measure where it comes in, we're not going to have the feeling of the second, but we do actually have the feeling of the second right away. It's not that our first note has actually moved anywhere. So we hear that second, but he turns it into a suspension. Okay, so every even measure, so measure 2, measure 4, measure 6, measure 8, okay, that is going to be a 2-3 suspension in the lower voice. The lower voice of the canon. The left hand, again, is not part of the actual canon, okay? It's the accompaniment, essentially, to the 2 voices at the S, okay? So we have a 2-3 suspension in the lower voice of every even measure, and then a 7-6 suspension, which is actually an inversion of the 2-3, okay? Inversion of the 2-3 suspension is a 7-6. We see that in every upper voice of every odd measure, okay? So he's alternating 2-3 suspension and 7-6 suspension. So he's using that interval of the second to give us this kind of suspension type of feeling. So we have, what is our time interval? Well, it's only 3 beats, okay? It's just a measure is all. We have, it's gonna be hard to hear up there. Okay, it's kind of a cool sound, and let's listen to it. If I can get it to go in here again. Variation 6, here we go. Pretty cool, huh? It's kind of a cool sound. Okay. Moving forward. So that was variation 6 at the second, canon at the second. So what will we say, what is going to be the next variation that is going to have a canon? So we've had variation 3, variation 6, just add 3 more to that. Variation 9 is going to also be a canon, okay? And this time, instead of being a variation or a canon at the unison or a canon at the second, it's going to be a canon at the third, okay? Here we go. Again, we have a lower voice that's not part of the canon. Okay, we start on a B, and here the follower is going to come in on a G. Okay, this is our original. And then we have, that's pretty cool, isn't it? If you just play the first measure of the leader and then the first measure of the follower, it sounds like it's just sequencing it almost, okay? And those ideas are kind of interconnected. Okay. Let me have you listen to part of this one too. Cool. That's a fun one, I think. Okay. In the last few minutes, let's look at the next ones. So that was variation 9. The next variation is going to be variation 12. And this is a canon now at the fourth. We have a canon at the unison, second, third, now the fourth, okay? And this one, if you can find the follower, where's the follower? Okay, we have this. It's pretty fun. Sorry, well. So we have a rest, which kind of gives it a neat little bit of tiny bit of syncopation effect. And then the follower actually is going to start in the left hand, okay? And it's just a little bit lower, not so much. So we notice that we have the leader starting on do, the follower is starting on sol, pero it's at the fourth because the follower is lower than the leader, okay? Now, another thing that's interesting about this one is we would maybe expect the follower to be something like this. Let's see. Okay, that would be actually more the leader, but at the fourth, lower. Okay, but this one is different. So let me play again the leader for you. Okay, now the follower is. Or, sorry, it would go down to the C sharp. Okay, what's happening with this one is that it's actually using contrary motion. Okay, so it's still imitation, it's still a canon, but it's contrary motion. So what's happening is where the leader goes down, the follower goes up. Okay, the leader goes down by half step, the follower goes up. It's actually by a whole step in this case, but that works with the key setting that we're in. Okay, let me just play. Well, we're basically out of time. We'll have to start with this one next time. Pero hopefully this is helpful. I think it's kind of interesting to see what's happening with these, and we're not looking in depth at the entire variation even, we're just looking at little bits at the beginning, but you can see pretty quickly what's happening. This one we have a whole measure between, so that's our time intervals of measure, 3 beats. And this one adds an extra effect to it of using the contrary motion, which is pretty cool. It gives some variety. It's not like just copying and pasting at the interval of a fourth. Okay, so please do your hoist and stand reading. And there's also a reading guide on that. And hopefully that will give you a little bit more understanding too of just the general concept of imitation and how that's going to be relating also to canon. So Lord willing, next time we will talk about canon and finish talking about some other special devices that are used in canons. And someday maybe you can write a canon, or even sometimes you can take hymn tunes and use a little canonic imitation, and that can be pretty cool too. Okay, so we are going to stop there, and I will see you, Lord willing, next week. Bye.